Poirier versus Islam. Who do you got, guys? I mean, how do you see this fight? When I go over to DraftKings and I check this thing out, you're not going to see a surprise. Islam's the favorite, right? He's like a minus 600 to Poirier's plus 400. I'm not giving you exact numbers here, but I don't have to. That doesn't surprise you. You know full well that Islam's going to be the favorite going into this. And you also know full well that if Islam is going to lose this fight to Poirier, it is very likely by finish. Dustin is going to have to finish him to beat him. It is far less likely that they could go the distance, turn to the judges, and Poirier gets his hand raised. All right. Now, I am stating the obvious for you. There's a reason we have the fight, because none of us know those things to be true. I'm just sharing, like if you go over to DraftKings, you're not going to get hit with a great big surprise. But it's like anything. What happens next? And do you want to know why what happens next is so important? Because then you start to guess the athlete's motivations and desires and how bad does he want it going in. It's very few stories where a guy says, this is my last one. And he starts to bring the party and the celebration, and his family comes, and they all get tickets, and they're going to send him off the right way, whatever that means. And then he goes out and has a great performance. In any sport that requires an athlete to dig deep, historically speaking, when is the last one? You don't see those depths. Dana White talks about it all the time. But if this is ever a sport that you're wondering, you're considering retiring, stop right there. The answer is you should retire. If you're ever on that fence of should I or should I, the answer is you should. Now, that's Dana White. That's his opinion. That's what he states on it. I just want to share that with you because I do not predict for you with a victory or with a loss that Dustin Poirier retires. I don't predict that for you. But I do feel comfortable in telling you with a loss, Dustin Poirier does not return to 155. Now, Dustin talked about, and this was just a week ago, he said, I don't want to climb that ladder again. I know I could. I know what it would take. I've done it many times. It's what's got me here now to the title shot with Islam. But I'm not going to do it again. And that seems very fair. But if you look at that, that could also mean he's going to retire, right? I mean, the UFC is a place exclusively for champions and guys that want to become champions. Like as soon as it is established that you do not have a path to a championship, as soon as it's established that will not happen, you're no longer in the UFC. As somebody asked me, well, Chael, don't you think if Dustin loses, that will almost guarantee it's going to be Dustin versus McGregor down the road? It's like, no, if Dustin loses, I guarantee you he will not be fighting McGregor. Guaranteed, absolutely, not even a maybe. Like if Dustin's coming off a loss, it wouldn't matter if Conor was to defeat Chandler or lose to Chandler. It wouldn't matter. If that match got made of Dustin versus Conor and there was no way to sell upon the public in any scenario that would bring the winner closer to a world title, you're not doing it in the UFC. Believe me, a lot of guys have tried. Huge names that you love in matches that you would have loved to have seen. And behind the scenes, it doesn't even get made because they are so fierce to that policy that this is a place for champions and contenders only. And I bring that up because what would that do with Dustin's motivation? What would that do with Dustin's drive? Would it help or hurt? You were to put yourself in his shoes and you were looking for that dig deep drive before you went over to DraftKings and placed your bet. And do you disagree with me, by the way? Like within your mind, if Dustin Poirier is going to win, if you feel Dustin is going to win, is there also a scenario where that's playing through in your mind where he wins by decision? And Dustin has a number of great submission techniques, but none of which are stronger than his guillotine. I only suggest that for you because all attacks, particularly finishing attacks, are armed with an element of surprise, and in this case, the element of surprise is gone. Islam is well aware of how good and strong Dustin is with the guillotine. That was the same information that Saint Denis had and added to his ability to defend the guillotine of Dustin Poirier. So, where's he beat him and win? And I think that you have an answer to that question. I think that you very much could see a knockout by Dustin Poirier, and the one thing that you will never have is a time within the fight, if you're an Islam fan, where you could exhale. And a lot of times you can. A lot of times it's simple math, right? If you're in a 5-round fight and you got a guy that moves a lot, he's used to movement. As soon as he banks 3 rounds, it's just math. As soon as he banks 3 rounds, he no longer has to beat the opponent or even tries. He just runs out the clock. But that's not a situation where you would see when you're taking on Poirier, is it? Dustin doesn't seem like one of those guys that you can frustrate and make quit, that is ever going to buy into the idea of a moral victory. I made it this far. I went the distance with him. Aw, shucks, guess it just wasn't my night. And that's also one thing that Islam knows. So now if you're Islam, and you're well aware that your opponent has a guillotine and knockout ability, you take the knockout ability away by getting in close or taking him to the ground. When is the last time that you saw the guy on top get knocked out? So to do that, you also have to put yourself in danger of the guillotine, the other thing that you're worried about. Like, it's really out of the frying pan and into the fire type situation. So Islam knows that he can do it, but it's probably not a situation where he wants to go out and trade too long. He's going to have to drag him to the ground, but to drag him to the ground, he's going to have to disguise it. Now, once he drags him to the ground and once he disguises it, don't forget, he's going to have to do that 5 times, because every 5 minutes, the referee is going to bring you to your feet, give you a little rest, and then make you start over. Like, it is one of these situations where if you go to DraftKings, you're not going to be surprised. That's not going to strike you as a surprise when I come out and I'm the one that reveals to you that Islam is the favorite. But I do think that if you were to just question yourself, and we're just talking about broad opinion here, which is all a favorite is, what do the majority of the viewing public think? That's all that means. I think that I make a very good point with you when I also tell you that for those of you that believe Dustin is going to win, you don't think that he's going to win a decision. So if you're going to DraftKings, it would seem wise if you're placing the bet on the young man from Lafayette who he surprised a lot of people a lot of times, including in his very last fight, that you just go a little bit of a step further and you talk about a finish. And if you're going to talk about a finish, do you think he's more likely to strangle him or knock him out? And the reason I'm asking you that isn't because your opinion overly weighs or that I'm even trying to get you to part with your money and place a bet. Not at all. I'm trying to get you to understand that when you have to deduce that, and you have to break down whether you think Dustin can finish him, and if you do think he can, you've got to establish how. Is he going to knock him out or is he going to strangle him? Because Islam Makhachev has to do that same deduction. And that's the one thing that we don't know. Khabib has been in there with Dustin. Khabib has a very good idea. Khabib is going to be able to take that information and knowledge. He's going to be able to pass it to Islam. But we don't know. Did Khabib feel Dustin was a bigger threat on his feet or in the grappling realm? And that's the part of these matches that start to be exciting. They start to be very interesting. You start to think, well, what can happen if Islam gets him down? And moreover, what happens if Islam cannot get him down? Overall, you go to DraftKings, you're not going to have a surprise. You're going to see Islam as the favorite. But there is a big question and there is a big discussion on how this fight ends. That doesn't just come from the Dustin Poirier believers. That also comes from Team Islam. How? What's the strategy going to be? Is he going to grind this thing out? Is he going to try to finish him? Is he going to go out there and trade with him, which all of a sudden starts changing those odds to more of a 50-50 battle? It's an interesting match. Predicting a winner seems easy. You just got to throw a name out. But predicting how that winner gets it done, things start to get a little bit more complicated.